Jimmy and I are both Region 6 guys. So along the way, talking to a lot of great college coaches in those realms. We do love our short conference, our Region 6 stuff. So we've had quite a few Region 6 wrestling coaches. I went to high school with Jason Nace. He was a teammate of mine. I was roommates at the Trenton State Wrestling Camp with Dan O'Cone. So he's a longtime friend of ours. And then I worked with Rob Nucci for a little bit. So we had him on as well. And we have some other coaches scheduled. And we know that you do a great job covering wrestling at the Shore Conference, and we see all the stuff that you do, all the articles and everything that you put out. So we wanted to have you on to kind of get a little bit of your origin story, put you out there to our fans that maybe aren't from the Shore Conference, and just have a awesome conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm looking forward to it. Always, listen, I could talk short conference sports ad nauseum, especially wrestling. So should be fun.
Good. Well, we're here for it. Yeah. Like I said, we're Jimmy was a region champ and he was a third place finisher, and I was a runner up and a third place finisher as well. So, Coach Nucci broke down the whole Region 6 realignment to us to try to
Mhm.
ease some of our discomfort with it.
Yeah.
But we're through and through that Shore Conference Region 6 stuff. Between Jimmy and I, we probably have multiple B South and C South Conference championships from back in the day in one sport or another.
Yeah, definitely. I remember you guys over at Point Borough doing your thing. I'm right
Yeah.
down the road at Brick Memorial. So
Okay. All right. Yeah, we probably, that's the other thing we do is we like to make the world a little bit smaller here. So I'm sure, as you said, we're same county. We probably know a lot of the same people and have traveled in the same circles at one point in time or another.
oh yeah, those three guys you mentioned, like I've known Nace since I was a kid. Funny
Yeah.
story about Nace. Nace took me and like some names you'll know, Rob Jimenez.
Yep.
Can't remember who else was. He took us to like a WWF event, like in on the train. He was like our chaperone. We were like high school kids. Nace was like the strength and conditioning coordinator for Brick Morrill's girls soccer team when my wife played. So I've known him. His mother-in-law was like one of the secretaries at Brick Morrill when I was there. So I've known him. Same thing with Ocone. Known
Yeah.
him for a long time. Our daughters are now friends too, which is like kind of weird, cool, but
Okay.
like kind of weird. So and then Nucci, same thing. As long as I've been covering wrestling, Rob's been around. So
Yeah.
pretty good
That's
guys.
that's awesome. Jim, did you throw a thumbs up there? I didn't see it.
I did, sir.
Okay. Sorry. Thank
You're
you.
good.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back and we do greatly appreciate you joining us tonight. We've got a fire episode for you as we always do. But before we get started, make sure you like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Hit that button. Follow us on Instagram and all podcast platforms. We love our feedback over here at Airey Bros. So please drop a comment, join the conversation, let us know what you think. And if you're getting any value out of anything we're doing over here and you feel so inclined to support the show, you love what we're doing, buy us a coffee. Every sip, every bean fuels the next episode. And let's not forget, this is a grassroots movement over here at Airey Bros Radio. And we're all about spotlighting the programs, the coaches, and storytellers we wish we knew during our recruiting and athletic journey. For wrestlers, runners, student athletes alike, this is for you. And again, if you have anything coming up, any training you need help with, whether it's an ultra marathon, a marathon, or a couch to 5K, we've got you covered. Hit up Black Sheep Endurance for elite running and nutrition coaching. And again, thanks to our friends over at CS Instant Coffee for fueling this episode. Fueled by champions built for the grind. This is an athlete owned and trail tested company. And this podcast is helping to support that, and they're helping to support us. So head on over to csinstantcoffee.com and give them a little love. Tell them that Airey Bros sent you. Now, for tonight's guest, Bob Batters is joining us. He is one of the most respected voices in New Jersey sports media. Bob has been covering everything from high school to pro since 2004. He's a sports writer and a photographer for Shore Sports Insider. He's a former managing editor of Shore Sports Network under Town Square Media. New Jersey high school wrestling analyst and play-by-play broadcaster for MSG Varsity, combat sports writer for MMADiehards.com, covering UFC, Bellator, CFFC, and more. Whether it's under the lights on a Friday night or a cage side at fight night, Bob has seen it all and told the stories that matter. Without further ado, Bob, it is an honor and a pleasure to have you joining us tonight. We do greatly appreciate your time. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's one heck of an intro. It reminded me of the journey I've been, kind of all over the place. The MMA diet that brought back some memories. Yeah, it's been a while since I've covered some cage fighting, but those were some good times.
All right. Well, we are excited to get into the journey as we were talking a little bit before. We're big wrestlers in the cross country and track and field space, but you've seen it all, done it all, covered it all. We want to hear all about that. But before we get into it, if you have anything you would like to plug or promote anywhere you would like the fans to connect with you, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And like you said, I'm the right now I'm at Shore Sports Insider. You can head to shoresportsinsider.com, follow all our coverage across all the sports. And me personally, you can find me on the major platforms. You can find me on X, find me on Instagram, Bob_batters. Pretty easy to find. So thank you guys again for having me. Looking forward to talking some wrestling and whatever else we get into.
Heck yeah. We appreciate you joining us. And Bob, probably the most important question we're going to ask you. We probably already know the answer to this. You might even know where we're going at this point. But is it pork roll or Taylor ham?
Pork roll.
Atta boy.
Gotta be. I mean, come on. I'm born and raised down
Nope.
here. It's not Taylor Ham. We can get real deep on that conversation, but it's pork roll.
That'd probably be an interesting little side piece article to cover at some point in time during the wrestling season between the different districts and the different regions and who's team pork roll and who's team
Yeah,
Taylor ham.
might be the most unwinnable argument around the state, but still a fun one.
Yeah, some of those Ivy League New Jersey coaches they might argue that, but if we had to go back and tally all the guests that we've had from New Jersey, I would have to say pork roll is definitely hands down. Even some of our Pennsylvania guests and Coach Coach Brian Schneider, even out in Nebraska, says that it's pork roll. So
Good to hear.
yeah,
Good to hear the word is spreading correctly.
absolutely. So Bob, first thing we like to do when we kick everything off is want to hear your origin story. How did you get? You mentioned your time going to WWE with Jason Ace. What is your journey into the world of sports journalism and sports photography?
So, I go way back to being a kid and just playing sports. I think I primarily played baseball mostly growing up, played some football, played some ice hockey. Kind of got involved in a million things. I think everyone, when they're a kid, was probably thrown onto a soccer field at one point. I think I was that too. Play a little bit of basketball. I never did wrestle though, but I grew up in Brick, on the Brick Memorial side of town. Went to Brick Memorial, and if anyone knows, the Brick Memorial teams from '97 through about 2003, which were some good teams. I mean, that most of that team was a lot of my really good friends. Some of my closest friends to this day. Nick Catone was my next door neighbor, grew up next to him. Brett Jankos, current Colts neck head coach, lived right down the street. Mark Rosenfeld, good friends of ours. The Jimenez brothers, Ricky and Robbie, Casey Stalin, Danny and Dave Rogers. I mean, you can go down the list. And so just growing up with a lot of wrestlers as friends got me into the sport. Even before high school, I'd go to some of their tournaments and kind of just hang out. And it was never anything I was, I think at times I thought I'd maybe try wrestling, but I played some hockey and it was it was never something I was interested in competing wise, but I was always interested in it from a spectator standpoint. Um, so that's where my, love and interest of wrestling started. As far as just getting into the career of sports media, I think when you're a kid and you play sports, a lot of kids want to be a professional athlete. That's the dream. And most of us get to a point where they realize it's probably not going to happen. So for me, it was how can I stay involved and close to these sports? So it was be a broadcaster, be a writer, something to that. And originally for me, it was be a broadcaster, be a play-by-play guy. It's what I went to college for. Initially went to Rowan University, started out as a radio, TV, film major, and then switched halfway through to journalism, but still stayed involved, did a lot of radio stuff for Rowan Radio, and some television stuff. And then as soon as I graduated in 2004, I was fortunate enough to get a job, a couple months later, fall of 2024, working at the Asbury Park Press. Started there, and one thing has led to another to where I am today.
Well, shout out to college radio. That's where this podcast started. It was
Yeah.
college radio. Rich and I had an opportunity on the campus. I went to University of Colorado, Denver, and there was three colleges there, and one of them had a radio station. they let us come in and start a podcast at the radio station. So we kind of know what that's like. And I'm sure you got funny radio station stories because we got plenty of them. But you talk about your start in 2004 at the Asbury Park Press. I believe you and I met in the summer of 2007. You came into Rhino Wrestling with Mike Mal.
I did, yes, I remember
You
that.
did a little bit of a story on me going to Middlesex. I thought it was awesome, and that's kind of where I came in touch with you. And then I also want to thank you because Rich is in South Carolina, I'm in Florida. Because of the coverage you do, your Instagram feed, we can watch, we can follow the kids from the borough still. We can see all the highlights. And I kind of like it because we don't have to watch a full match. We can watch your little highlights that you put up. I'm like, all right, sweet. We're all caught up. We saw the highlights of every match. So I want to thank you for that. I'm curious, in that time, 2004, you started with the Asbury Park Press. How has the coverage changed since then? Because I know digital was just kind of coming on the scene, and now digital is king. How has have you changed from being a journalist, kind of in digital and stuff like that?
Immensely. I mean, the field and the industry has changed so much, and the job has changed a lot too. Certainly for me, I remember when I was at the Asbury Park Press, there was an online component. There was a website, app.com did exist, but it wasn't utilized like it is now, where it's, I would say it's, 75% of most, news organizations traffic and whatnot, maybe even more. I mean, we just saw the Star Ledger stop printing the physical paper. So
Really?
yeah, took a couple weeks ago, I want to say
Wow.
was or either a couple weeks ago they announced it. Either way, it's if it hasn't stopped yet, it's stopping soon. So, there was some online component, but wasn't like it is now. And just the job was different. I'd go to cover a high school football game on a Friday night. And that was back when, we staffed every single game, covered every single school, and there was no social media. There was no, Twitter or X. And you didn't know what happened in any of these other games till you got back. We're flying back in our car. You're on deadline, trying to think of the lead to your story, and you get back, and it's like, oh, what happened here? And that was fun, kind of hearing everybody's stories of whatever game they went to. Uh, and it was also different coverage wise because I went there and I was a reporter. For football, I kept stats. Any sport, you keep the stats, you write the game story. Now it's video highlights, trying to do a little bit of everything, taking photos, sending out updates on social media. The job is no longer doing one thing. So that was definitely an evolution. I think everyone in the industry, if you want to succeed, has had to go through. We and some of my colleagues, fortunately, we kind of did that early in our careers, probably around the same time you were talking, 2007, 2008. I was working for a company called Digital Sports, and we kind of just started doing video highlights and a little bit here and there, doing some interviews, of kids after games. And we were really one of the first, people to start doing that. And now it's commonplace, not that we, unearthed something that no one was going to eventually start doing, but we were able to do some things, get in on the ground floor, at least locally. So, you know, fortunately, I was never really kind of chasing any of the trends. We kind of just started doing things we thought would be cool. And most of the time it worked. But the job is definitely very different. And so is the way people consume media is just drastically different than it was before. The attention spans of people are not like they used to. I don't think I write stories the same as I did even 10 years ago, because I don't think a lot of people are going to be willing to read a long form story, no matter how good the story is. You kind of got to get to the point pretty quickly now.
You mentioned not chasing trends. Has there been a moment of you having to be ahead of the curve as things change and being able to be like, all right, well, that's going to be my next avenue that I'm going to go down? You mentioned driving back, sprinting back home from an event, having
Mhm.
to get the box score out or something like that. Now with something like Twitter, it's instant, right? You can go match by match and kind of follow and not be there.
Mhm.
So how do you kind of stay ahead of it? I guess the question is.
I think you just kind of you try to pay attention to what the audience wants. There's balance, I think, to it from a journalistic standpoint. You want to cover it the way you know how, and do it in a professional manner, but also, for a lack of a better term, you got to give the people what they want. So people want videos, but they don't want to watch a whole match. Like you said, they want some quick clips. Certainly Instagram and TikTok are perfect for that. The quick updates on Twitter and now X are perfect. To get the quick information out, maybe quick video out as well, and do that in a live setting. So you're constantly reporting. The reporting isn't after the fact. You type out your story, it ends up in the paper, it ends up online. Like from the second you arrive someplace, you're doing it because now information is able to be, you know, disseminated instantaneously. So that was, I think that was a learning curve for a lot of people in the industry. But I think you could say, like any industry, like the younger people tend to gravitate to that earlier. So when social media was becoming popular, I was a younger man without kids and, more time on my hands. So you're able to dive into things and maybe go the extra mile. And fortunately, it was at a time when I think, you kind of had to do that. Um, and good things came from it. I think I learned a lot along the way of what works, what doesn't work. And I think you just kind of continue to go through that process day by day. What works, what doesn't work. This used to work, it doesn't anymore. Why? And just a lot of that in terms of what does the audience want and how do you deliver it, but while still, maintaining professional journalism standards and still doing like the basic job of, which still is for me, I go to a match, wrestling match, right? What's the story? What's the written aspect of it and get that done. But there's a lot of layers to it now.
Do you have a favorite component to the kind of new way of media coverage?
I like it all. I mean,
Yeah.
writing is what I do first and foremost. Like I say, I'm a professional writer. I am a photographer with professional capabilities. I wouldn't say I'm a professional photographer on that level. Certainly, as some of the guys who really do that as their full-time profession year round. But I enjoy it all. I love writing. There's no, writing a good story with some good anecdotes, and being able to just kind of sink your teeth into something is always fun. Be able to craft that. Photography is fun too. I really enjoy that. And same thing, starting to dive into a little bit more videography, this Scholastic season. Already had some memorable ones. I mean, that Harvey Luddington Jordan Chapman match. I remember that the match in general, Brickmore Cranford, was insane. And then that match, I remember just getting done, doing a couple interviews, just going back to my car at Brickmore, and be like, I gotta get this video up like now. Um, and that was fun, and that's also an example of how things have changed because that was, you know, even 10 years ago, it was unheard of. No one's really rushing back to upload any kind of video. It was more like, it'll be up soon on YouTube. But now, especially something to that degree, you want to get that out as quick as possible.
Yeah. It's even as far as like streaming stuff, Jimmy and I have been able, like you said, we're in different states now, but we've been able to almost in real time stream some of the shore conference matches this past winter that some of the schools and their media outlets of the schools, the kids have been putting that stuff out. So, after we get off a podcast or something, and then all of a sudden we're streaming through YouTube, and I'm like, oh, Manasquan's wrestling. We just had Justin Browski on. Let's tune in to see how the Warriors are doing tonight.
It is pretty awesome because you can, for someone who, you can't get out that night, or they're, like you guys in different states, you're not going to be able to see those matches live. The ability now to, whether it's a school having their own YouTube channel or a media company live streaming it, or I know a lot of the schools now use the NFHS, their streaming network, National Federation of High Schools. So there's opportunities to watch so many matches. I've done it on a couple times today. I'm not going to go out and cover a match, but I'm kind of interested in this one bout. Let me throw this on, see what happens. I go back to the Blair Academy Del Barton match. That was great. Throw the stream on there, and that was obviously an amazing match. And that was not an option. It was usually, if you weren't in the gym to see it live, you didn't see it. You only kind of heard about it. So yeah, technology certainly has made things a lot easier on the viewers.
Yeah. I mean, and even back in my day in 92, 93, 94, you had to wait till the Star Ledger came into the library in the morning. We were all waiting for the librarian to get to school so we could check the box scores or read whatever article was out there. And so it's kind of a little heartbreaking to me to hear that the Star Ledger is no longer going to be printing because so much of my athletic career at the high school level was about checking box scores for cross country meets or track meets or wrestling matches and or seeding, you know what I mean? Like seeing the seeding for, the regions or for different tournaments are like, oh, I beat that kid. He's the number one seed in this region and whatnot. So yeah, times are changing, but we're evolving with that and talking about the times changing from a coverage and a media perspective. How have you seen the athletics within the shore conference, but the deep tradition of sports across the board? And you pick a sport, there's short conference teams that are doing well at the state level. Have you seen that landscape evolve over the years from, say, coaching styles to athletic development?
I think it's a very good question. I don't, from my standpoint, and it's gotten better across the board. I mean, I don't like, for example, wrestling. Like the wrestling's never been better. I think. You're at the state finals this year, and you look at the amount of not just nationally ranked kids, but kids in like the top 5 in the country, ranked number 1 in the country. I feel like you go back and it used to be, you know, you had a couple of those kids, and it was like, wow, this kid, look at this kid, top 5 in the country. Now it's like every other kid in New Jersey is a nationally ranked kid. So I think just in terms of, and I think it's in sports across the board, like the athlete is, at such a high level. So many of the highest level athletes, and especially in wrestling, where you see it, and you guys know, like the dedication levels off the charts. Like I think for most people, it'd be hard to fathom how dedicated and mature and structured a lot of these kids are. I think that has changed in a massive way for the good. Now, there's a lot of things you could say that have changed in maybe a not so good way, but I think that's just athletics across the board. And I see it now with my daughter's playing sports at the youth level. There's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad, and it's kind of the nature of where we are today, whether that's from a developmental standpoint or just the culture of certain sports. And it's not, I wouldn't make that as an overarching claim. I think every program, every school is going to be different, what depending on what coach you have and the culture that's kind of instilled in whatever program that is. So I think that's been probably the change I've noticed the most is like the caliber of the athletes. Like there's great athletes of every generation. I just feel like the depth now in a lot of the shore conference sports, especially our flagship ones, wrestling, football, of the sports I cover. You could even say girls basketball, which is a sport I cover, but is a flagship, one of the shore conference. Like the kids are so good now. It's at a level where it can boggle your mind a little bit if you really break it down how talented and driven a lot of these kids are.
Do you think it's having more resources as far as clubs, travel teams? Do you feel it's the parents that were good athletes and now they have families and they're doing the proper things for their kids? What do you kind of think that middle ground is of why it's, because short conference has always been good. It's always
Mhm.
been super competitive. Rich and I, we wear that with a badge of honor when we go places. We know Region 6, we like to call ourselves short conference. You're
Mhm.
going to stand out anywhere in the country.
Yeah. I think both those things you said are accurate. I think the number of resources that are available now to student athletes is so much greater than it was, when we were coming up, and it was just different. You played, you went out, you're going to sign up for a sport, whether it be baseball, football, basketball, wrestling. What did you do? You went out, you signed up, your local town, the rec program, or a rec travel as it got older. You went through that. Wrestling clubs, now are very prevalent. When I was high school age, right around that, I mean, I remember sure things starting out, but I just remember the Edge. Like the Edge was the only one I knew. It's like all my buddies went up to the Edge up in Kenilworth, right? And then there was the one up in further North Jersey. So yeah, that the number of resource certainly greater. I think there can be a saturation point with that, like how much is too much. I think some parents maybe can be a little naive and think that, oh, if I put my kid in this club or go to this showcase or go to this clinic and then I'm spending insane amounts of money and maybe like expecting a return on their investment. And that's not really how it works. Like you can put your child in the best situation to succeed, but at the end of the day, it's not going to guarantee them anything. But certainly the amount of resources that are available now are huge. And like to what you said, Jimmy, I think that's definitely a valid point of, parents who were athletes kind of went through the system in the sense of, played high school at a high level, maybe were recruited, maybe high level college athletes, and then they just understand what to expect. Now the landscape's still changing. You know, my wife was a very high level soccer player, played Division I soccer, but the landscape of, girls youth soccer that my daughters play now compared to when she played is night and day. It's completely different. So I think there's still a learning curve even for the parents at that level, but that definitely helps because they know what to expect. They know how to guide their child through that. And look, with anything, I think the more information you have, the better decisions you can make, at least more informed decisions. And I think we're getting that now.
And talking about that landscape changing, one conversation that comes up all the time when we talk to high school coaches, whether it be private school or public school, it's kind of that battle of the private versus the public, and the private is kind of taking over. As someone who covers a lot of sports, do you see that across the board? Is that just wrestling? And what are your thoughts on that?
It's across the board. It's so different in a lot of sports, and I think it's very different within the shore too. Like every conference or area of the state's going to have their own unique issues in terms of the non-public versus public. Like I don't. We'll use wrestling for an example because then there's not a lot of numbers out there. This many non-public kids in the state finals and champions and medalists and all that, and does like nobody did anything wrong. Like they can go to whatever school they want. Do I think it takes away a little bit? Yes, in the sense where you're not going to see as much, the one kid, or the two kids from a certain high school. The high school team might not be good, but they always churn out a couple good kids, and those kids aren't going to go there anymore. They're going to find their way to a different school most likely. And I think that part stinks a little bit. Um, it's harder at a public school now. You almost have to be a public school that gets some kids in as well. Maybe not going out and actively recruiting kids, but if you have most of your lineup, like I'll use Southern Regional, for example. Southern's an awesome program. It's been a great program for a while. I venture to say 80 to 90% of those kids are kids that have come all through up through that program. But they have had kids move and transfer into the district. And listen, the parents, they're making that decision. That's not something you do lightly, even if it's for athletics. So you got to pick up and move your family and have an address in there. And if you're good, people will do that. It's happened at a lot of public schools in the Shore. I also think the Shore Conference is a little unique, and we're not saturated with non-public schools. Whereas if you go up in North Jersey and Bergen County, there's so many small towns where you might be the one good kid to come out of there. And you're going to look and you're going to go, am I going to stay here and try to carry the banner for my public school and maybe tread water? Or hey man, this school wants me over here, this school wants me over here, I can be part of this great team. Like I understand why people make those decisions. Has it detracted from the sport? In certain ways, yes. Those kids wrestling too, I've heard a lot of people, and I'm sure you guys have seen comments on social media and just people talking about, hey, the publics and non-publics should be split for the individual state tournament. I disagree completely. I'm vehemently against that. For the team tournament, sure, because it's an entire team. Individually, it's mano a mano. The kid that's at Del Barton, is he going to be not as good if he stayed at his home school? I mean, maybe not, but we know so much of the work and the preparation these kids do is at their club anyway. And I'm not trying to take anything from the high school rooms and high school coaches because a lot of great work is done in a lot of those rooms. And especially you get a program like Del Barton, a St. Joe's, CBA, St. John Vianney down here from the non-public ranks, Southern, Brick Moral. Those are tough wrestling rooms. So you're definitely getting a lot in there. But I think those kids, they're spending so much time at their clubs anyway. I think regardless of what high school those kids are at that level, they're gonna be pretty darn good anyway. So I would never like to see them separated when it comes to an individual tournament. But who knows at this point, because the chasm is starting to get a lot wider. Whereas the best public school team, like, can they compete with the best non-public team? In some years, yeah, but in most years, probably not. And that's just kind of the way it is. They're all-star teams. Like, that's what they are. And I don't say it in a negative way, like that shouldn't happen. Like, that's the nature of it. And it's kind of the landscape we're in. And if you're a public school, you kind of just try to navigate it around the best you can and, hope you can build a program that's, very good and entices as many kids to stay as possible. But it's about more than the program too. You have a great program, maybe the parents don't like the school district or whatever. So there's a lot of factors that I think that are out of the hands of public school coaches, and they're just trying to do the best job that they can with what they have and what comes to them.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's a lot of other factors outside of just the sports programs that go into those decisions from parents and students. And I also think things ebb and flow, and when I was, like I said, 93, 94, when I was a junior and senior, like you had said, kids were moving, families were moving into other districts. We're not moving into other districts, but using addresses in other
Yeah.
districts to we won't mention any teams, but that sort of stuff existed. I think now also maybe one because of different schools and educations and different things, but I also think, well, we don't have to move our family and uproot our whole family and move to another town in another county so we can use, you can go to X school, we can stay where we live, but now you can go to a private school or a non-public school and compete and do all those things. So I think it kind of ebbs and flows, and maybe we're going to see the pendulum kind of swing back the other way to, you know, public schools that are on the top of the heap at the top of the number one ranking. But um, I think it's all part of the sport and how that goes. I'm curious, talking about, the changes and those sorts of things. When I was in school, you still had multi-sport athletes. You
Mhm.
had kids that played football, kids that wrestled, and kids that maybe did track, or, your basketball and baseball players. And then as I was phasing out and all through when Jimmy was in school, you had a lot of specialization. And as a track coach, I'm always trying to get the football coaches to encourage their kids, or even as a wrestling coach, hey, let me make your lineman a better football player. Let's improve his marketability. He wins some matches. He becomes a state place winner. That's going to make him a better football player. There's always a football player in the Super Bowl that
Mhm.
was a state level wrestler or a state championship wrestler. Are you starting to maybe see those multi-sport athletes kind of coming back? Are we seeing some cross pollination between sports?
I think so.
Yeah.
Slowly, I think it's coming back. And I'm a big proponent of the multi-sport athlete. Like I was saying, my kids play three sports, and two of them they play year round. And listen, I don't specialization, I think, has a time and a place. To me, that's high school age, maybe going into your junior year. If you really know certain sport is going to be your future and need to focus on that, go right ahead. But don't give up a sport you like playing because of one coach said you shouldn't do that. You need to concentrate on this. You're in seventh grade. Like, no way.
Yeah.
If a coach ever said that to one of my kids, I'd be like, that's not happening. Like, then this isn't the team for us. I don't believe in that at all. Some of the best athletes I've ever covered are multi-sport athletes. Now, the devil's advocate in that will say, well, yeah, sure, they're awesome. They could have played everything, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to. Mike Gesicki might be the best example of all. I mean, Mike Gesicki is the starting tight end for the Cincinnati Bengals. He was a freak athlete of probably the freakiest athlete I've ever covered. He played for Southern, was obviously an amazing football player. Was, I want to say, over 1,500 point score in basketball. And his most dominant sport was volleyball. He was a state volleyball player of the year. Southern had the number one team in the state without him. And then he decided, yeah, I'll play. And it's just not fair. It's like a 6'6" cheat code just hammering the ball. So yeah, Mike Gesicki, three-sport athlete, didn't give any of those up. Played all four sports, I believe, every year. Maybe one year there was a year he didn't play volleyball, but he played, three sports. I think in the majority of his career. I'll go back to another guy, Kevin Mallist.
Hmm.
Kevin was an unbelievable football player, wrestler, and people forget he was a tremendous baseball player too. Played all three sports, didn't stop. Um, I think there's more of those kids now. Now, if you're a wrestler who weighs 106 pounds, like you're probably not playing another sport, and I get that to a degree. But there's even some kids like I know Rick Memorial's 113 pound this year, Mikey Napolitano. Mikey's 113 pounds, so football is not really his thing anymore. But I remember coming up, he was an amazing football player. Freshman year, I think he was like their leading tackler on their freshman team as like a 110-pound kid. But eventually comes to the point where that's not realistic.
Yeah.
And some of these kids out there are 300 plus pounds. But yeah, listen, if you're a multi-sport kid, keep doing it. I would say as long as you can. And to your point, you know, if you're not doing anything in the winter and the wrestling coach comes out and you're a lineman, give it thought. You know, it's going to make you better. If you're not doing anything in the spring and track coach comes up to you, go out for it. At the worst thing that's going to happen is improve you in your other sports, and it just keeps you active and keeps you competing. And that's why I like it. Like, you're just competing all year round. A one, and there's a bunch now. I think more than I've seen probably in the last, going back maybe 5 years. I think now there's a lot more multi-sport athletes. I don't have any of the hard numbers to prove that. Maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like it.
Mm.
And Jake Clayton at Point Borough is another big example of that. I mean, Jake came in as a freshman where, I knew of him coming up through, before he was in high school, but, an all-shore level football player, a two-time state medalist wrestler, and his best sport's baseball. And people forget that. Tremendous three-sport kid, doesn't, everything I know from talking to him and his dad, he loves three sports. He's going to keep playing them. You guys know wrestling well. You've been around wrestlers forever. Sometimes kids who only wrestle can be uptight. And especially you get that down in the state tournament, like that's all they've been thinking about for the last 363 days. And that's their whole life. And some kids, like Jake is a good example, competes year round and he loves wrestling. He wants to win, and you could see that. But he wrestles for fun. And I think there's a degree of looseness that some of those kids have in that moment where all their eggs aren't in that basket. It doesn't make it right or wrong. I just think that is a huge benefit to be competing all year round and just kind of have that in your veins, that ability to just compete and not get flustered. And I think playing multiple sports helps that. It cross trains you, I think, physically, but I think it cross trains you mentally as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that about putting all your eggs in one basket and having that kind of zero pointed focus. And, there's only so many kids that walk away from the state wrestling tournament or the NCAA championships with a win as their last match. And for a lot of kids, that sticks with, that trauma sticks with people for a long time. And we had Dave Esposito on a while back, and I was mentioning, like I literally stepped off the wrestling mat and I was thinking about outdoor track. So like I've always stayed a fan of wrestling because I just didn't have that. I obviously I lost my last match, but I was on to the next and worried about that. And I also knew that I was going to be running in college. So just, I wasn't soured by it. I was just like, well, that's the breaks. That was the better guy that day. And, let's keep moving forward. So long story short, I agree with what you're saying there, that there's a lot of different good components that come out of not being that single pointed focus that early on. And I think the more athletic you are, probably the less likely you are to get injured.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think a lot of people maybe think the other way. Oh, don't play this. You might get hurt for this. You might get hurt. Look, there's some degrees I get it. I think Harvey Luddington played football maybe his freshman year at Brickmore. And I think after a while, I was like, all right, maybe you shouldn't do that anymore. Uh, and look, there's definitely instances where it makes sense. Like, don't ruin don't get hurt playing a sport that is not really your thing. Maybe you're just doing it because your friends asked you to come out. Like, there are instances where I get it, but
Yeah.
for the most part, if you coming up playing 2, 3 sports and you like them, keep playing them. Keep playing them, because there's going to be a day where you can't. You can't just. How many sports, high school wise, or youth coming up, are life sports you can continue playing your whole life? Not many. You know, you can't go play a pickup football game, at least not, real football, like, playing, 11 on 11 with pads on. There's not like pickup wrestling matches anywhere, other than the Bald and Fat Classic. There's not really too many, options to do that. So play, because one day it's going to end. And, I think if you ask a lot of athletes who maybe gave up a sport earlier than they wanted to in high school, if you catch up with them, 10 years down the line, I think a lot of them might regret that decision.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah, I think you hit that on the head as far as being uptight and putting too much into, because this is all you have. I think you
Yeah.
hit that on the head. And you mentioned a bunch of NFL guys throughout your coverage that you got to follow. Do you have any athletes or any stories throughout the years that you followed from beginning to end, or athletes you followed from beginning to end, where you knew someone was gonna make the NFL, or you knew that team was gonna go on a dynasty run, anything like that?
I mean, definitely, yeah. I mean, the professional athletes certainly stick out in your head. I mean, how can they not? I mean, Mike Gesicki's a great example. I mean, came in as a freshman, and you get to know head coaches, and Chuck Donahue Senior, Southern's football coach. He's not someone who's just going to wax poetic about, kids and this kid's great. And I remember him coming up his sophomore year and like, this kid's going to be one of the best kids we've ever had. Like we probably should have played him as a freshman. You're like, whoa. And then all of a sudden, it takes off and you see what he becomes. Quentin Nelson, Red Bank Catholic, same deal. Quentin Nelson, multiple time all pro guard for the Indianapolis Colts. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame. If he retired tomorrow, he might be in the Hall of Fame. He only played like 5 or 6 years. That dominant. He's the most. See, Quentin Nelson is a tough one to explain to people because he's an offensive and defensive lineman, but he might have been the most. He probably was the most dominant athlete I've ever covered, just in terms of like that kind of size and strength from a high school athlete was terrifying. And then he had that next level drive to match it, which once you started talking to him, you're like, all right, this kid is different, like in all the best ways possible. And yeah, you go to Notre Dame and you're a top 10 pick in the NFL draft and you're a multiple time all pro. Makes sense. When I first started the Asbury Park Press was when Noshawn Moreno was at Middletown South, and obviously, a Shore Conference legend, the New Jersey legend, went on to the University of Georgia, played on those legendary teams at Matthew Stafford, AJ Green, was a Heisman Trophy finalist, I believe, or I don't know if he's a Heisman Trophy. I think Matthew Stafford might have been, but he was up there. I think might have won the Doak Walker, was a finalist for it. Played in the NFL, played in the Super Bowl. You talk about Donald Brown, same thing. Red Bank Catholic, was a running back there. Played at UConn, led the nation in rushing, went to the NFL. And then most recently, Kenny Pickett, was backup quarterback with the Philadelphia Eagles, won a Super Bowl, recently just got traded, but I covered Kenny throughout his career at Ocean. He was a little bit different because Kenny was a really good football player, but wasn't dominant like those other guys. But talking to coaches, I remember talking to Frank Edgerly, who was the Red Bank Catholic coach at the time. And prior to that, in between stints, I think RBC, Frank went to the NFL, coached with the New England Patriots. I think Frank now works in the Houston Texans scouting department. But I remember talking to him and they're like, no, this kid is legit. He can make all the throws. Like you watch. And then his senior year at Pitt, he ends up blowing up, Heisman Trophy finalist in the NFL. So that was a pretty cool ride to see from a kid who you saw he had the physical traits, but wasn't way up on that pedestal like some of the other guys, but then, end up, in the same spot as those guys. And then wrestling wise, I was in high school same time as Damian Hahn, so I didn't get to cover Damian. I just got to watch him beat the daylights out of
Everyone.
a bunch of guys, everyone. Yeah. A bunch of
Yeah.
guys I knew. So, and then I worked for MSG Varsity covering statewide wrestling at the time when Bergen Catholic really was on their rise. So I covered all of Nick Suriano's career and most of Anthony Ashnault's at the same time. So I'm pretty fortunate to both those guys. Andrew Campolatano as well. So I got pretty lucky right in that time where I was covering the whole state. Yeah, I had, 3 of the 5 four-time champs come through. So that was fun getting to see those guys. And then the other sports that I didn't cover personally, but just looking around the shore and, paying attention to maybe some of my colleagues and that were, covering and seeing some of those guys. I mean, we didn't cover him, but you go back J.R. Smith. I mean, just a legend at Lakewood before he transferred to St. Benedict's, top pick in the NBA draft and whatnot. So yeah, the Shore Conference has its share of professional athletes. I think it was going through, I don't know, recently, and like there's someone from the Shore that is either a professional athlete now or has been recently in all 4 of the major sports. Plus, you go to the UFC and we've had a ton. Frankie Edgar certainly being on the top of that list. Kurt Pellegrino, Nick Catone. We've got a lot of guys. Francis Marshall now, fighting on some of the Fight Pass cards. Even NASCAR. I mean, Martin Truex Jr. They got a road named after him down in Southern, and he's a NASCAR Hall of Famer. We even had we've had some PGA Tour players. I mean, Ryan McCormick was a kid I covered he played golf at Mater Dei, played golf at St. John's, kind of fought and clawed on the Corn Ferry Tour for several years. Finally got his tour card last season. I think he dropped down. He's back in the Corn Ferry, but just to make it to the PGA Tour even for a season is a pretty crazy accomplishment. So, listen, the Shore there's a lot of talent in these 2 counties.
Yes.
And go back to what you were saying on a previous question about kind of why, I think just the demographics of our area has always lent itself to being good in athletics. So I think there's a just the right combination of like having enough money for the accessibility, but being blue collar enough to just be tough and just kind of will your way to being good.
Bob, I think you nailed that right on the head. And you bring up Martin Truex. I've told this story a couple times on this podcast, but our mother was the principal at Southern Regional Middle School. And Martin would wind up in her office a lot when she was the assistant principal there. And she would always say, Martin, what are you doing? Like, what are you going to do? And he would always say to her, Mrs. Airey, in a couple years, I'm going to be making more money than you. And that's always like the story my mom tells about Martin. And she was telling it when I don't know what the series is called before, NASCAR, I guess Bush League or something like that.
It was like the
She'd,
Winston Cup back in the
Yeah.
day. Yeah.
yeah, she was telling that when he was in the Winston Cup and to see what he became. Rich and I always laugh about that.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to see just, from where certain athletes started to where they are now. It's pretty incredible.
But Bob, you mentioned Chuck Donahue Sr., and I just want to add to that too, because I was coaching track at Southern Regional. I taught there for a while as well when Chuck came in as a football coach. And he was one coach who was very encouraging of his athletes to be multi-sport athletes. So I think that's also a big thing is that when the football coach either coaches other sports or just appreciates the value of what a track program can do or a volleyball program or whatever it may be. I think that's a big thing. And so shout out to Chuck Donahue Sr.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's a lot of coaches who do not share that sentiment.
Yeah.
There are a lot of football coaches who don't want their wrestlers wrestling. They don't want them cutting weight. They need to be in the weight room. I think it's short-sighted, but that's an old school view that a lot of those coaches, if they're going to break it, it's going to take a lot of chiseling to get them to kind of change their ways. They want them doing all football all the time. If you're not on the football field, you should be lifting weights. I I don't agree, but that's kind of the way it is in some programs. And like you said, there's other ones who are, you know, proponents of the multi-sport athlete. I think at the smaller schools, you will see more multi-sport
Yeah.
athletes really by nature.
You
The
have to.
small schools for sure. You go to the successful Group 1 programs, you're not gonna have too many kids who are only playing one sport. You're gonna see a lot of the same names, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, wrestling, lacrosse, whatever it may be. Um, and I think that's still true. They have to have success, and I think that you know Point Borough is a good example. I think there's a lot of multi-sport athletes there. Same thing with Manasquan, Rumson. You look at two schools right now that are highly successful in almost everything, boys and girls, and there's tons of multi-sport athletes, and they are big proponents of that. You're talking about Justin Borowski before. I think what one of the things Justin's done a great job is kind of immersing himself into all things Manasquan and helping out. I know he was an assistant with the lacrosse program for a couple of years, just helping out there. And look, you get a kid maybe to come out and wrestle, you know, even if it's just one or two, that helps you build your program. And just talking to those coaches, get on the same page with them. Hey, do you want your kids wrestling? You do, great. Okay. If you don't, why not? This is maybe there's some misconceptions you can clear up. And I think that's one of the reasons that that program is starting to really build in the right direction. You got to get out there and have conversations with the other coaches in your building. It's not, sometimes I think there will be coaches who say, no, it should be done this way. And I don't want to hear anything you're going to say. And other times there's some misconceptions you can clear up. Hey, he's not going to be cutting this much weight, or he's not going to be cutting any weight. And this is what we're going to have him do. And, I think it's very beneficial.
Yeah, and I would also just add one last thing to that, and then we could put a bow on it. But I just think in general, football coaches should stop encouraging kids to gain weight anyway.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I
You want to be
agree.
more athletic. You don't need to be bigger or heavier.
If you're bigger, it's like you be the size that you're going to be. Obviously, you want to get stronger, but
Sure.
like just
Absolutely.
packing on the weight, it's tough though. Like I've seen so many talented football players not get a look at the next level because they just don't pass the eye test.
Right.
The meat market at that level.
Yep.
If you're 6'5" and 260 pounds, but you're not that good, you're going to get more offers and looks and just the benefit of the doubt than someone who's been a great football player the whole life, but is 6 foot and 180 pounds.
Mm.
College coach is I can work with that. Like I can build off that, that's just football. That's kind of unfortunate. Jimmy Lawson is a good example of that. Jimmy obviously a legendary wrestler at Manchester, was a really good football player too. Jimmy thought he can play in the NFL. I want to pursue a football career. Okay. He went to Monmouth, and listen, Jimmy was awesome, but at 6 foot tall, 6'1", 285 pounds, like you're just another guy on the football field. And then we know what happened. Eventually, yeah, I think I can go back to wrestling. Cal Sanderson knocks on the door, and you're an All-American in Penn State in a couple years. So, uh, and I've seen that the other way too, with football. I've seen basketball players who were, again, if you're a 6'6" basketball player, you're kind of just another guy. But on the football field, if you're athletic, you're a unicorn. So I've seen that go the other way where kids give that up and become football stars. But to your point, yeah, you don't need to just jack on the weight. And if you're 6'6", 320, I think that's good. You
Yeah.
don't need to put any more weight on.
No.
Bob, talking about the rich history of the short conference wrestling, we just had a 4-time state champ. I believe short conference's first 4-time state champ. And anyone who's been living under a rock, that was all over the news about Anthony Knox. Have you witnessed anything on the media side as far as that coverage, something that crazy, and from week to week not knowing that a wrestler was going to be eligible to wrestle or not?
I Yes and no. It's honestly not the craziest story I've come across. Not even in wrestling in the short conference. We did have one year, I want to say it was 2008, where the number one seed in regions was out because he got arrested for
Murder?
yes, I think yeah, we got arrested for murder. So that probably takes the top. But that happened so quickly. It was like whoa, and then the story was written, and then it was kind of over with. This was different in that it became this entire saga that enveloped the entire high school sports world in New Jersey, certainly with wrestling. And just I remember being in the Region 7 tournament, like what am I walking into here? Like what is this going to be? Thankfully it wasn't the circus that I think a lot of people thought it might be, and I was hoping it wouldn't be. But it was weird. It was odd. It's very unfortunate because a 4-time wrestling state champ is such a rarity. In the short conference, he's the only one we've ever had. So I would have really liked to have been able to cover it under different circumstances. Like I didn't even get a chance to talk to Anthony Knox at all. Regions, states. At regions, I understood why I wasn't talking to people. At states, he did not. He did a couple select interviews. I tried to get him kind of after his match. He was walking up the stands, and he politely declined. I always had a good relationship with Anthony from time his freshman year. I had good conversations, but he didn't want to talk. So that was kind of a bummer having to write a story about a 4-time state champ without any of his comments. But at this point, it is what it is. Uh, Separating everything that happened off the mat and on the mat is something that's been very difficult to do. I tried to do that in my coverage. At some point, it kind of all weaves together. It's unavoidable. But we're talking about just what Anthony Knox accomplished on the wrestling mat. I don't think there's been anyone better in New Jersey. I think that debate can go on for a long time because there's been undefeated state champions. I think to me, if you look at Nick Suriano, he won everything. Like he won multiple, I think he won 4 Beast East titles. They went out to Doc Buchanan. He won that twice. He wrestled Dayton Fix for like 45 minutes
Yeah.
without a takedown. And who's number one? Like just insane. But Knox has been so dominant. Like he didn't have those same opportunities. He won BC East every time he was there. He did have the one loss. I'd escaped the Rock his freshman year, but was undefeated with the New Jersey and just completely dominant. And you see what he is doing to some of these wrestlers in these semifinals and state finals, and they're not even close matches. Just completely dominant. So good offensively. Probably the best offensive wrestler that I've seen in terms of the 4 state champs. Like Suriano was impossible to score on. If he got one takedown, it was over. I mean, he only got taken out once in his entire high school career. It was like quarterfinals of the Beast of the East. Like that still blows my mind. And Knox got taken down more than once, but like who really remembers that? If you didn't, it's a nice stat to throw out, but just having watched him as many times as I was able to, he was so good, it was almost boring because there was no drama at all. You're like, it's Knox. Like, okay. Like, and you would wait for a really good opponent that he could sink his teeth into, but he made kids that were so good look average. like when you really take a step back and look at it, it's insane. It's insane the level that he competed at for 4 years and the kids that he beat and how badly he beat them in a lot of these cases. When he wanted to turn it on, like he could score. I think he did that too this year. You could tell within a match. I don't recall which one it is. Like he was up and like something annoyed him. I don't know what it was. Hand to the face. Something annoyed him, and also he had like 5 takedowns, like 20 seconds. Just like a reminder, like don't poke the bear. So he was fun to watch. I wish it ended in a different way, but you know, an unforgettable career, certainly.
That's our second vote for Knox as the GOAT in New Jersey, Jim.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's I love it because I think that debate can you could take that in so many different ways. You could take all the four-time state champs. I know there's people out throw Scott Winston in there, you know, undefeated for his career. That freshman year, I still maintain like he was a contender, but man, I don't know if he's
He
beating
wasn't winning. He
Dan
wasn't beating
Balmont. Yeah,
Valmont.
Balmont was an absolute axe murderer that
Yeah.
year, as awesome as Scott Winston was. But even guys with losses, different time. I mean, you remember to get 100 wins, you had to be like 101 and like three. Like you couldn't lose. Now that number is probably the equivalent, maybe 130, even maybe higher. You know, it's I've kind of been desensitized to that. You're like, oh, a kid had 160 wins, like that's cool. Like it's not.
Yeah.
It's like that short conference wins record changes every year. Like I don't even know who has it now, but
Yeah,
it changes.
and I'm gonna show my age a name that you mentioned, and I will still die on this hill, but Damian Hahn was one of the most dominant high school wrestlers I ever saw. I mean, he tech failed in the state finals the senior
Yeah,
year, and like wasn't he had a close match with Nick Fichetti, and it wasn't even a close match, 9-5 his junior
yeah.
year, and
For him, that's close.
Yeah, and Nick Fichetti won Fargo and was one of the top recruits. So I'll still put my flag in the Damian Hahn mountain, but that said, Knox pretty impressive.
Team Hammer going way back.
Heck yeah.
That's like a last talk about a lasting image of short conference wrestling. Just watching Damien do his thing, and you look over and just Miles Hahn be like this. Time to finish, Damien. Yep, time to go. Yeah, that's again, they talk about the heyday of short conference wrestling. Like I think there's been a lot of heydays. Like the wrestling on the shore has been incredible lately. But I go back to that time when I was in high school and even a little before, a little after, and yeah, the rest it was fun. State tournament was great. You know, like you said, some of those bouts were unbelievable. And yeah, Damien's he's way at the top of that list too. I mean, you could there's a lot of wrestlers I think around the state you can put in that argument, but when you're a four-time state champ, you start at the top of that
Yeah,
argument.
Yeah.
no doubt.
Me, you can call it recency bias, but Knox, you know, four-time state champ and just so dominant. You know, he's got my vote.
Bob, I got one last one for you if Rich doesn't before we get in the final four. Do you have any advice for maybe someone who's listening to this podcast, younger high school kid that likes your work, how to kind of get in the industry and any advice in getting into the industry?
So reach out to, you know, any local media organizations you have. If you're a high school kid, and you have some kind of, you know, a journalism department in your school, or even if you're interested in covering it more from a multimedia perspective, you know, um, from the video aspect of photography, first of all, get involved in your school, whatever they have there. There's a school newspaper, get involved with that. If there's school, you know, photography club, TV department, anything, get involved with that. A lot of times those teachers have contacts in the industry they can help you out with. And if not, just reach out to one of your local media people and maybe they can help you. We have a kid that is a student at Brick Memorial, and he's a videographer and he does a great job and he does work for us and we pay him like we would anybody else. And, you know, that's a good way to get your foot in the door. Those opportunities did not exist, you know, years ago. So when we were in high school, I don't think the Asbury Park Press or the Ledger, or the go back to the, you know, Ocean County Observer were hiring any high school kids to help out with anything. I think now kids like that can get their foot in the door, even if it's working for free. I know nobody likes to really do that, but I would say don't get taken advantage of. Don't do a ton of work for free, but even going out, covering a game, just learning the ropes. It's a demanding industry. It's hard. Uh, for a while, like the pay is is not good. You know, hard to do if you have a family and you're trying to, you know, make it into that industry. But just get out there, put your name out there. You know, develop social media accounts, which I think you look around, there's a lot of really talented young, you know, content creators making really good videos and whatnot, and getting their name out there. And if you're looking to do more on the writing side, it's a little harder because you need a place to publish that. But you know, if you have teachers within your school that can help you, reach out through them. And if not, reach out to your local media company, whether that's a newspaper, and see what they have. See if they have internships, anything where you can kind of get your foot in the door and just learn a little bit about the industry, and see if that's something you want to do going forward into college, where a lot of those avenues will open up as far as internships and connections through professors and whatnot.
Bob, last one I got for you. Jimmy and I we love our sports coverage. We love, the interest stories, those sorts of things. 30 for 30s are some of our favorite sports documentaries, past or present. What's a story on a team, an athlete, or maybe even a coach within the short conference or within the wrestling specifically that would make a great 30 for 30?
Ooh, that's a tough one. There's
That's a
There's a
loaded one.
lot. We always would joke, like, man, if we could write a book, but we'd have to change the names to protect the guilty. I always used to joke with the late Denny D'Andrea. You should write a book, Short Stories of Short Conference Wrestling. I said, Denny, I don't think I could tell like 99% of those stories, but there's been a lot, to be honest. I mean, something that would, I think in general, short conference wrestling, you could really tell. You could have a 30 for 30 on that, just in general. Like the rise of it, um, starting probably in the early 80s in terms of it really becoming saturated. I think Brick Memorial kind of rising up and being the number one team in the state. And I think it was kind of a powder keg there in a way where it just exploded onto the scene. And I know from you guys talking to Coach Nucci and him telling you about, a lot of those guys went to college in New Jersey, and all those guys of that age kind of went right into the, teaching and coaching force all at once, and really helped raise some of these, great programs and lift them up. Football wise, I mean, there's been a lot of dynasties. There's been, you go back to Manasquan and their 5 championships in a row. And most recently, this Toms River North football program, the run they're on is unprecedented. 3 straight state titles, undefeated, 2 of these 3 years. So there's some really good overarching stuff like that. There's just been some great individual feature stories have been able to be around throughout the years, whether it's just kids, persevering and overcoming odds, or, just some crazy stories. I remember at the Asbury Park Press when we were there, former Raritan football head coach Bob Gennarelli was I'm trying to remember the exact details. It's going back over 20 years, but he had bit by a mosquito and got like an encephalitis, and it was bad. It was like scary. At the time we're writing the story, everything was fine, but I remember one part of that story, he's in the hospital and his brain is swelling. So he's like acting like a crazy person, to throwing doctors and orderlies around. They jab the guy in the neck, but like to calm him down, like crazy stuff like that. There was a football player from Manchester, Craig Leppert. I don't remember the name of the condition he had, but essentially he was like allergic to the sun. Like the sun really like burned, like he couldn't be out in the sun for like prolonged periods. And football player. Thankfully, Manchester played most of their games at night. So I remember my colleagues got stumped doing a story on him. I remember my first year at the Asbury Park Press, I did a story on a Point Borough football player, kid Marty Friedman, who was deaf, but was a good football player for them. And that was a cool story to write. I still cringe if I go back looking at it, because one of the first stories I wrote, and the writing is not what I would have liked it to be. So, but I've been fortunate to really be around, sports in the short in the state for a long time, be able to tell some really cool stories. It's interesting. The first front page story that I ever had with Asbury Park Press was the Frank Molinaro Jordan Burroughs wrestling state final, and like who knew what those guys were going to turn into? Because I remember that being down in Atlantic City and talking with the guys we had down there, who's going to write this final. I remember talking to Joe Adelizi, he was the longtime writer there. His son Joe, now the head coach at Pinelands. Kid, which one do you want? Whatever you want. You're in charge. All right, take the Molinaro one. That should be a good match. It was like ultimate tiebreaker. And again, like who knew, what those guys would become? Certainly Jordan Burroughs, the greatest, American wrestler in history. You could, as of right now, I think you could say that. And then obviously Frank winning a national championship and being a U.S. Olympian. So that's pretty cool to look back on. And there's been so many like there. I hope there's many, many more in the future because that's the fun part. Telling the cool stories, and I love telling stories of triumph. In this job, you got to tell the good with the bad. We always try to focus on the good more because it's what I like to do. Sometimes it's unavoidable, as we've seen, over the years. But uh, telling stories of triumph by high school kids is fun, and we get a lot of those. And I think in wrestling, you get the most of that. Just the way the sport is. Individually, some of the best stories some of my favorite stories I've been able to write are the kids that ran through the blood round and, ran through the wrestlebacks, I should say, maybe got that huge win in the blood round. Because you write the state finals and those stories are awesome, obviously. Those kids are realizing lifelong dreams. Like if you're in the state finals and you lose, like nobody talks to that kid, which is a weird thing, but it's the truth. Very rarely you'll have a kid who knew they were just happy to be there and knew they were, you know, probably going to lose and didn't really care. And you could talk to them then, but it's those kids coming through the wrestlebacks. Joey D'Angelo Point Borough was a good example of that this year. Finally broke through. Even Sonny Amata from Rumson, kid I was really impressed with. I mean, he's defending state champ, nationally ranked kid, losing the semifinals. How many times have we seen those kids kind of just pack it in, forfeit out? Didn't, came back, took third, talked to us afterwards, extremely well spoken, and I was able to write what I thought was a great story out of that, just talking about, being able to persevere. And those are the stories that stick out with me the most. Sure, the crazy ones and those, how can they not? But ones like that are really the ones I remember the most. Just kids finding a way. Because I think we forget sometimes you're 16, 17, or 18-year-old kids, and they are so mature and mentally tough that like I couldn't have done that in high school. Forget it. And these kids can brush things off that would break a lot of other student athletes, especially now where, you're not just living with your own defeat in your own head. You got people chiming in on social media and whatnot, and it can be very difficult. And the way some of these kids handle it is really impressive.
You
Amazing.
got us in the short conference fields, Bob. Thank you, sir. We could talk short conference sports with you all night, but we want to be super respectful of your time. Final floor, Rich.
Let's do it.
Bob, are you a coffee drinker?
Yes.
How do you brew your
Yes.
coffee and how do you take it?
I am. So what I tell people is I'm not a coffee snob and I'm a coffee nerd. I'll drink, like I'll go to Wawa and get a cup of coffee. Did it today. But like I prefer to get my own beans and grind them at home. That's what I usually do. I'll either go right down the road to Divvy Tree in the borough, or there's a Rook right there too. I like Rook. Big fan of there's a company Stone Creek Coffee out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin that makes some good stuff. I've ordered a couple of their bags before. So yeah, grind it at home, brew it up fresh, and just a little bit of light cream. That's how I roll up my coffee.
We are coffee nerds as
Yes.
well. Sometimes we get on the snobby side. I am on a cold brew kick right now, so I'm not as much of a snob. But one place I will tell you, and you've probably been there before, but my favorite at the shore, Rich debates me on this. We have hard conversation about this, but my favorite place to get a pour over is Turnstile in
It's funny you say that. I have a few people on my daughter's lacrosse team are in that like the Manasquan, like Belmar, that like area. And I hear them talking about it a lot. And I pass by it like at least a couple times a week, and I haven't stopped in yet. And a lot of people have been telling me I need to. So I think this might be the final push for me to
yeah,
go in.
when you get a hankering for those good notes, good pour over, go to Turnstile. Now, if you're in a rush, don't go there. But if you have some time and you want a good cup of coffee, I suggest Turnstile.
Yeah, I will give them that. It's delicious coffee. It's just not my vibes. Bob, do you have any daily practices or rituals you do on a regular basis to show up as the strongest version of Bob Batters?
No, and I wish I did. I probably should. I think like as any father of like three daughters would, one that's about to be in high school next year, life's a little hectic. So it's just kind of like survive in advance. Um, I just try to like cliche, like I just try to get up and like have the best day possible. whatever that may throw at me. Whether I got a million things to write, or I got to figure out the logistics of like how to get one kid to and from practice and home and whatnot, and just anything else I got to do in life. So uh, I wish my life was more structured than it is, but that's just not in the cards for how it is. It's been the hours that I keep are super inconsistent, which is just kind of the nature of it. I'm used to it by now. Uh, for a long time, I was not a morning person. I still probably I'm not, but I have to be up because kids got to go to school. But sometimes when you're at a match late the night before or a football game, if it happens to fall during the week and it's 1 in the morning, you just you finish what you got to finish and try to get as much sleep as you can. So consistency is not something, unfortunately, I can have a ton of in my life, but it's fine. We thrive in the chaos mostly.
Probably why you're not a coffee snob. You,
Yeah, can't afford to be. Gotta take the.
sometimes you just got to get a Wawa coffee.
It's true.
Bob, what are you listening to right now? Music, podcasts, audiobooks? Are you reading anything?
Not reading anything at the moment. Podcast, I shuffle around a bunch of stuff. I enjoy golf a lot. I'm a very poor golfer and don't get out like at all. So improving doesn't happen. But I listen to the No Laying Up podcast a lot. Those guys are good. And they have an offshoot called the Trap Draw, which is like everything but golf. So lately I've been in a lot of that. I've just listened to a podcast they had about like airports and just a bunch of stuff. They have this cool series they've been doing on like NFL owners and kind of like just kind of profiling them a little bit, how they came to own the team, where they, got their money from and everything. So that's been pretty interesting. Music wise, like my musical tastes are all over the place. Mostly like a heavy metal guy. So been digging into just kind of rolling through the same old, a little bit of Mastodon today, some Insomnium, some good Scandinavian death metal. People
Nice.
hear that from me and they're like, "What?" I'm like, "It's not as crazy as it sounds. It's just the genre. It's not that crazy. I can put it on my kids in the car and if no one like is freaking out, no one's crying. It's not like that." So
Scaring parents
also,
as you're pulling into parking lots?
yeah, no, no. Listen, I'll sometimes you don't want to scare too many people. But at the same time, like I got three daughters, so there's a lot of whatever they want to put on sometimes ends up in the car as well. So, but
Well,
yeah,
that would explain the axe behind you there.
I play guitar. I'm not great, but it's fun. I've been doing it since college, and it's just enjoyable. Like I said, I my musical tastes are not a huge country music person, but like I don't dislike it. It's just not really my cup of tea. But I like classical music. I kind of like it all. I love music. Like music is a big part of just my life in general.
I like it. I have to put on some Mastodon tomorrow for the kids' first period of PE for bench press day.
That might get some looks.
You'd be surprised. They shock me sometimes with some of their musical requests, some of the old stuff that, brings me back. So I'll see what they say.
Here, the most nowadays, it's like, you have sound like an old man here at my nowadays, but like now you get some of like the wrestling teams, like the entrance music that come out. I wonder how many of those kids have any idea what that song is. Like Brick Moral coming out to Sympathy for the Devil. Do they know what that is? Do the Point Borough kids know what Crazy Train is and who Ozzy is? Like, do the Southern kids, rather, do they know what AC/DC is? Or is that like just the song they come out to and they don't really care? Like, I wonder about that.
Be interesting.
Yeah.
Find out, do a little research. Bob, last one we got for you. It's a little lighthearted one here to close it out, but it could be anything. We talked about Divi Tree. Maybe there's a food item. Maybe you go to Rosie's Pizza. There's some delicious breweries. Maybe you head over to Last Wave or what's the other one in that they
Icarus?
Icarus,
Icarus.
yeah.
You mentioned you have three daughters, so maybe you're a closet Swiftie. Do you have a guilty pleasure?
Yeah, I like to play video games when I have
All right.
time.
Okay.
Not I don't really have much time, so but I do. Still a kid at heart with that. Still got the PlayStation and Xbox sitting there, and they do literally have to get dusted off every now and then, but they're still there. So I like to play some video games here and there. It's a good way for me to relax, like it, and like also like I don't know. I feel like certain things that like can keep your mind sharp.
Yep.
I don't watch much. Like people will try to have a conversation with me about the latest show that was on, and I'm like, I don't watch TV. Not that like I'm against it, but it's like I don't. I'm the guy who watched like Game of Thrones, like binged the whole season, like 6 years after it like was done. Like that's just how it is. I'd much rather just I don't know. I'll throw on a YouTube video and like learn something, watch something interesting, geography, something nerdy and dorky, and just kind of roll with that. But guilty pleasure, probably, yeah, probably just playing some video games.
You playing Madden? You do like first person shooters? What's your
Kind
game of
of
choice?
everything. I'll play some Madden. I'll play some Call of Duty here and there. I'll play some, kind of whatever there is. I don't even know what I'm playing right now. Like The Witcher, which is like a 10-year-old game. So just what kind of whatever strikes my fancy at the moment and can give me a distraction for a little bit.
All right. We dig it.
Bob, thank you for your time tonight, and thank you for sharing some short conference insight, getting Rich and I all in the short conference fields tonight. We could talk short conference sports all day. Appreciate what you do and letting guys like us who don't live close anymore but can still follow and stay up to date with everything because of your coverage. Thank you for the work you do and have done.
I appreciate it, guys. Thank you. Great being out with you. And like I said, great talking short conference sports.
Yeah, Bob, it's been an honor and a pleasure. We really do appreciate your work. Keep doing great things out there covering sports in New Jersey and the short conference specifically. We really do appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Bob Batters from Shore Sports Insider. Make sure you go check him out. If you're not already following him, let him know that the Airey Bros sent you. And we will be back next week. On Monday night, we will have Katie Wise from Marion University joining us. They were the indoor NAIA National Track and Field Champions. And we got a good one on Tuesday. The one and only Mick Betancourt, comedian, former wrestler, has a loss to Joe Williams on his record. He's going to be with us on Tuesday.